All right, good day to you all. This is not actually going to be a gaming thing. This is, I need to edit my. All right, good day to you all. This and I don't know why. I'm trying to edit what the title is, and we're not talking about World of Warcraft at all. I'm going to try to do this thing where I have a Bible study that I do in my congregation, and I'm going to be trying to do this on here. And also, I'm going to upload it to YouTube and Facebook and things like that, so that way people who are not able to be there could watch it and see what we're talking about. So I'm using PowerPoint, whether you for good or bad. All right, got that fixed. Super beef ravioli. So this morning we were at church. I began talking about worship and talking about what it is that Lutherans believe. So I'm a pastor in the Lutheran Church, Missouri Synod. And my goal is to kind of get you guys to think about and understand why we do the things we do, because the Lutheran Church could be very weird to some people, especially depending on what background you came out of. And so what I wanted to talk about to start is to talk about the architecture. When you go into a church, you could actually tell quite a bit about a church just on its architecture. And so we're going to go into, so what you're going to see is a sequence of photos of different church traditions and just kind of highlighting how the theology is on display in that congregation. And so let me get that going. Music's still playing. There we go, music's done. All right, so theology of a church and its architecture. And so the first church we are looking at is, for those of you who are not aware, this would be an Eastern Orthodox church. I had to look up. This isn't Greek Orthodox specifically. This is in St. Louis, Missouri. And one of the major elements you'll see if you're ever in an Orthodox church, where you could tell it's an Orthodox church, is the iconography, the icons. And so there's always a lot of icons in your average Orthodox church. And so the reason for this is I'm going to pull up a Bible passage to kind of explain why you might see that. So you can see up on here. So Hebrews 12 verse 1, it says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of God." All right? So that is the whole idea of the icons. The icons, you're seeing these figures, these heroes of the faith, and they're all aligned and they're pointing, as you can see right there in the center at the top, they're pointing to Jesus, because he is the author and perfecter of our faith. So, but there's also another distinction here in the Orthodox Church, and that is the location of their altar. The altar is kind of pushed into the back, and in some Orthodox traditions, these doors right here are closed until you get to the point of the celebration of the Lord's Supper. And this is kind of emphasizing the idea that the Lord's Supper is a mystery. The mysteries of the Lord's Supper is what it is. And so that's why you have it in the back, kind of pushed into the back like that. This here, moving on, this is a Roman Catholic church. This is the Basilica in St. Louis. It's a beautiful church. If you're ever in St. Louis, I actually encourage you to go in there just to look at that. What you see up on the ceiling, I'm raising my hand as if you can see what I'm pointing at. But if you look at the ceiling and you see where my mouse is pointing there, you see all these incredible paintings. These are what are known as mosaics. This particular basilica in St. Louis has the largest collection of mosaics in the Western Hemisphere. And so it is quite a thing to see. And I encourage you, if you're ever in St. Louis, to check this out. It is actually beautiful. And I just noticed this right up here, IHS. Those are if you ever wonder what those three letters are, those are the first three Greek letters in the name Jesus. Jesus is what it is. Some of you may be, by the way, just a little trivia note. You may not know this, but what is a basilica? What makes something a basilica? And the answer is a basilica because based on the fact that it is that it has the bishop seat, that there is a bishop present. Now, the thing I want to highlight, and here is where, so I talked about that the theology of the church is evidenced in its architecture. So if you look at this, you can't very readily find the pulpit. So this right here and here, that's where they preach and that's where they speak. And they do the readings. It's really kind of small. It's kind of hard to see. You really have to stress your eyes to see it. And here is the altar. The altar is pretty good size and very noticeable. The entire space surrounding the altar really stands out. And the reason for that is because the emphasis of the theology is on the Lord, on the sacrament. The sacrament is the center of the Mass. It's the high point of the Mass. So the Eucharist. So that's why the altar is going to stand out. So, all right. So this church, going forward, this is another church. This is a Catholic church in our hometown, in my hometown, where I'm at here in Iowa. And again, you'll notice there's a little bit of a pulpit right here. It's kind of small, but you can barely see it. What you can see very easily, though, is this large altar space right here. And this is not the biggest of Catholic churches, but this is a very noticeable one. And again, the emphasis is on the celebration of the sacrament. One of the other things I should note, and this is something that churches have done throughout the ages, is the difference between hard floors and carpeting. Hard floors are much better for magnifying the sound. And this particular church, I've been told by many people, it has a really bad echo. And so they don't have the sound quite right. But the idea, though, but the thing is, I have a feeling it could be that it has something to do with the speakers. The location of them probably doesn't work well. And that's the thing is, that's the challenge in modern day. So the old churches, I mean, like even the way the pulpit was a lot of times it's elevated. It was the pastor, the priest, or whatever would be preaching up there, and there'd be kind of like this thing right above their head. And the whole idea is that they're basically standing inside of a bell, and they are the source of the sound of this bell. And so the sound would go whoosh down onto the people so they could hear it. And there's kind of the cool thing of the word of God coming down from above. So there's that really cool imagery and thought of that. But it also is very good for acoustics, and these hardwood floors are very helpful for that. The problem, though, is that a lot of old churches, they have to be really, really good with knowing how to do the speakers, how to set the sound system, all of those things, because they sometimes can make the sound not so good. And that is what happens in some churches is the church itself is designed to carry sound really well, but with the speakers and all that stuff, it can actually cause problems. So when I was doing the Bible class this morning, when we got to another various church traditions, church bodies, I kind of trivia question my members and ask them, "Hey, what church body do you think this is?" And so, looking at this one, what type of church tradition, what church denomination would you guess this is? And the answer, there is really only two traditions that you could tell just right at the outset. If this happens to be a church, well, you'll know. I don't know what church this is. I just kind of Googled churches and I use them. But this church would have to be either a Baptist or one of the Calvinist tradition, Reformed or Presbyterian. And it takes actually a little bit to try to figure out which one it is. And the answer, the clue, is actually right over here with the stained glass windows. Now, both Baptist and your Calvinist will have stained glass windows, but what is different is how the stained glass windows are used and what is on them. So in this church, you can see it's just very plain. And that is characteristic of a Calvinist, because Calvinists do not put people on it. You won't see any drawings of Jesus or any of the heroes of the faith. You won't see like Noah or Abraham or whatever. You will just see something plain. And the reason is because of the rejection of icons. But if you'll notice, the focal point of this sanctuary is on the pulpit. They do have it looks like they must, I think that might be their altar. I'm not positive. That looks like it might be an altar. But the focus is right here. And the reason is because the focus is on the preaching. And a lot of times in these type of churches, the sermon is going to be, 30, 40 minutes. And so this is a Reformed church. This is Calvinist. And this is also why you'll never see in a Calvinist church, you'll never see a crucifix. A crucifix is a cross where Jesus is on it. The corpus is on it. And so you'll never see that. And that's because of the rejection of images. In the Lutheran Church, the way we number our 10 Commandments. So let me actually bring this up. This will help you out a little bit. Are you paying attention? Let me go. This isn't... I'm opening up the Book of Concord. Oops. This, by the way, the Book of Concord is the Confessions of the Lutheran Church. And so I'm kind of going to the Small Catechism. And 10 Commandments. So here are the 10 Commandments. And first commandment for the Lutherans, the first commandment is, you shall have no other gods. What does this mean? We should fear, love, and trust in God above all things. The second commandment is, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. What does this mean? We should fear and love God so that we may not curse, swear, use witchcraft, lie, or deceive by his name, but call upon it in every trouble, pray, praise, and give thanks. In the Reformed traditions, the second commandment, and some of you may be of that tradition, the second commandment is you shall have no graven image. And so that is good. That's a big part in their in the theology, is the rejection of images in the church, which is why you don't see them in here. You don't see Jesus on the cross. You don't see Jesus in the paintings. And I know of Reformed and Calvinists that won't even allow won't even watch the Passion of the Christ, because they can't even accept the idea of Jesus being portrayed even in movie form. All right. So let me move on to the next one. So this one, right away, based on what I just talked about, should tell you this is not a Reformed church. This is not Calvinist. Because right here and here, you have images, you have pictures of figures of the Bible, which means this is not a Calvinist church. And so, by process of elimination, this is Baptist. And again, you see right at the center is the pulpit, because the focus of the service is going to be on the preaching. All right. So the Catholic Church focuses on the sacrament. The Baptist or Reformed are going to focus on the word, the proclamation of the word. That's what the surface is going to center on. And the design of the sanctuary reflects this. And it makes sense that the Baptist and Reformed are going to be very similar, because, in all honesty, the Baptist theology and Calvinist theology are kind of the flip side of the same coin. And the whole idea is that, for the Calvinist, God, and this is going, 5-point Calvinist, at the very core major teaching is that God chooses some for God chooses some for salvation, God chooses some for hell. This is what is known as double predestination. In the Baptist theology, you either make your decision for Christ or you make your decision against Christ. So the reason why someone is saved is because they chose it. The reason someone is condemned is because they rejected Christ. And so that is the Baptist understanding. For the Calvinist understanding, the reason someone is saved is because they're chosen by God. The reason someone is condemned is because they're chosen by God to be condemned. And so it's basically the flip side. But a lot of theology, the focus of the theology still ends up being very similar. And, for example, the Lord's Supper in baptism sometimes can be referred to as an ordinance, because baptism is a sign of dedication. It doesn't forgive sins. Same thing with the Lord's Supper. There's a belief that it forgives sins. There's a belief that the body and blood of Jesus is present, which we as Lutherans do believe. So, all right, let's keep going. So these two churches are Methodist churches, and the Methodist churches, really, as a church body, are probably the hardest one to identify what they are just by looking at images, because sometimes they can look a Methodist church can look very Baptist, sometimes they can look very Lutheran, sometimes they look Episcopalian, sometimes they look kind of Reformed. It's kind of varied all over the place. So, for example, this left one, I actually put this into the PowerPoint slide. I forgot to identify that this was Lutheran, or whether this was Lutheran or Methodist or whatever. And so I couldn't tell what it was. And the reason I say this is because in Lutheran churches, so the design of a Lutheran sanctuary, and let me go up to this. It goes off of these words. This is from the Augsburg Confession, Article 7, concerning the church. It says, "The church is the congregation of saints, in which the gospel is purely taught and the sacraments are correctly administered." So if you go into a Lutheran church, what you're going to see in the front, you will see a pulpit. Note, I'm using a Methodist church as an example, but you'll see a pulpit. You will see the lectern. So this is where the sermon is preached. This is where the scriptures are read. And in the center, you'll see an altar quite often. And so you're seeing word, sacrament, gospel taught, sacraments administered. That is the focus in a Lutheran congregation. And so this is why I honestly thought that this Methodist church was a Lutheran church. Even if you look at the hymnals, I tried to use the hymnals and I thought, there's red hymnals, but they're red hymnals, which could be the Lutheran hymnal, which was from 1941, that was used in a lot of Missouri Synod churches. And some Missouri Synod churches still use them. And so I couldn't quite easily tell what church tradition this was. And I went back and searched and I saw it was a Methodist. But one of the things that does kind of stand out, and there are some Lutheran churches that do this as well, and this is an issue of debate between Lutheran pastors and laity, and this is going to get to be a controversial moment, and that is the placement of these things right here, and that is the flag. Notice the prominence of where the flag is. It is right in the chancel. So the chancel is the part above the steps with the inside of the rail. See, it's right there, right next to the pulpit. And there are some Lutheran churches that will do that. But that is not a desirable location of a flag. And there is a reason, and that is because, first off, it makes it look like this is an American church. It's not an American. It makes the church look like it's an American church. It's not an American church. It's a Christian church. As one pastor had explained it, I thought pretty well, is to understand it is that the church is an embassy. The church is an embassy to the kingdom of God. And when you go to let's say you go to a British embassy, now there might be an American flag here and there, but it's not going to have prominence. The most prominent flag is going to be the British flag. The thing that has the place of prominence in a church is to be the cross. And the problem is that is not good flag etiquette. When it comes to proper etiquette of the American flag, the American flag is supposed to have prominence over any other banner. But in our churches, the prominent is supposed to be the cross, which goes against the good etiquette of the flag. But on the flip side, if you know the Pledge of Allegiance, you'll say in the Pledge of Allegiance, one nation under God, and that is a testimony or an understanding of Americana, is that our government, our country, is not the ultimate authority of morality, and that's actually important. The one nation under God phrase, yes, it was added in the 50s. It is a reaction to communism, but it also works as a reaction to fascism, because fascism was all about the rejection of the transcendent authority, the transcendent God, the one who had authority and morality that went above the government. That was a major doctrine or philosophy in fascism. This is why Hitler did not like the Jews, why he called them, quote, intolerant in Mein Kampf, is because they had a transcendent God who could tell them that they can't do things like, killing your people. And Christianity had the same moral issues, and for the same reason, Hitler did not look fondly upon Christianity, and so his whole idea was he wanted to manipulate Christianity to get rid of it. And so the one nation under God phrase is a word against fascism. It's a declaration that the supreme authority is God, and they don't identify which God. And so, but the supreme authority of morality is not the United States of America. It is not the United States government. It is God, or the source, the logos, the unmoved mover, whatever you will. That is the supreme authority. And so having a flag inside of a sanctuary creates, especially in a prominence, creates quite a conflict from the doctrines of the United States and theological conflict. And so that is why many pastors, if they could, and by the way, I'm not just talking, I mean, I'm including pastors who are veterans, pastors who are chaplains. A lot of them want the flags moved, at least, even if anything, move it to like this corners would be a good spot because at least it's out of the chancel. Some pastors, they've gotten the practice, they put it right at the right at the doors as you're leaving the church. And so the idea is as you walk out the church, you see that flag and you're reminded that you as a Christian are now going out to serve the kingdom, the United States of America, to be a good citizen. It's a reminder of your vocation. And so in the Lutheran churches, and I'll get to this, and why in the Lutheran churches did we start having American flags in the first place? And the reason actually is, again, going back to the wars. Up until the early 20th century, you would never see a flag in a Lutheran church. What ended up changing this was when World War I broke out. And because in World War I we were at war with Germany, and many of the Missouri Synod churches were still speaking German in their worship services, there was questions of their loyalty. And so what they did is they started putting American flags in their church to declare, oh no, we're good, we're American. We are supportive of the United States of America. We don't support Germany. Well, a few years passed and some churches kind of moved the flags away. And people kind of forgot it. And then World War II broke out. And which, we were dealing with Nazi Germany and all that. And so again, the question of the loyalty of the German Lutherans was held in question. And so it was about this time, the 1941, the Lutheran hymnal was produced in English, which gave a prominent hymnal. So all the services would be done in English. And the flags were put in again into the sanctuary, and they never really left in many churches. And it was a declaration that declared to the government, those who held in question Lutherans' loyalty, the flag was put in to say, hey, we are not traitors, we are not working for the Nazis, etc., etc. And believe me, there was actual some persecution or hostilities towards Germans during World War I and World War II. I heard a story of a pastor who his church was still doing German for their services, and he got to a part in the gospel lesson for that day was Jesus saying, give unto Caesar what is Caesar's and unto God what is God's. Well, the German word for Caesar is Kaiser, which was the name of the leader in Germany during World War I. And so they heard Kaiser, and these Secret Service or FBI or whoever it was heard him say Kaiser, and they thought he was a traitor, and so the pastor was thrown in prison for a few days because they thought he was betraying the country. And so that is stuff that really happened in earliest parts of during World War I and World War II. And so that's why the flags got put in. But, if anything, if you're going to do anything, it should be outside of the chancel. And this is something that stands out here. And this is many church traditions are combating this issue, and there's not consistency in it. Another thing you'll notice in this particular Methodist church, what really stands out compared to this one you could tell, because they have the altar, they have the pulpit, they have the lectern, they even have the baptismal font in a prominent location. This would all be very Lutheran except for one thing, and that is the choir loft right behind the altar. You will not see that very often in a Lutheran church. And the reason is that a loft right there takes the focus off of Jesus. And so this is why Lutherans do not like having the band right in the center. They like having the band off to the side. The choirs off to the side or up in the loft, up in the balcony or whatever. They are not visible, extremely visible. This is even why the pulpit is off to the left and the lectern off to the right is so that the pastor, when he's preaching, he's not dead center. The center is still the altar, which represents the throne of God. And so the focus is all on Jesus. The worship service is all about Jesus. And so that is why it's designed that way. And so I'm going to stop there. And next week, I'm going to look at some Lutheran churches as we begin to talk about this. And so I hope this was of interest to you and intriguing. And maybe I should stream this to YouTube instead of Twitch. But this is what I'm doing for now. I hope you enjoyed it. It was informative, enlightening. Blessings to you, and see you next Sunday.